Hey everyone, welcome to week 10 of the hip dysplasia tutorials. We're really nearly getting to the end now. It's been such a great journey and I hope that you guys have learned loads and loads. Some of you have been asking if you can have a copy of my slides. I'm going to be putting the whole presentation of all the weeks together into one webinar, which you guys will all have access to. So you'll be able to get all the information all in one, and I'll put together a little download with the information that I've been sharing so that you don't have to go searching everywhere at the end of the 12 weeks. Just to recap, for those of you who haven't joined, I've started a Facebook group. It's called Canine Hip Dysplasia Support, and it's free access to everyone. You just have to ask to join, and it is for pet owners that have dogs with hip dysplasia, of course. And our focus is really looking at conservatives and where, as natural as possible, ways in which to manage hip dysplasia. For those of you that have other dogs that also have arthritis, you also might want to join the canine arthritis support group, and you can search for those under the group section, or if you go onto my Facebook page, you'll see that there's recently been a post just sharing those links. So it'll be great to have you guys all online there. I do some Facebook lives on there too, share lots of information, and there's so much you can learn from fellow pet owners. They're all in the same journey, all of you, and even myself, I learn loads from pet owners and things that they're trying and things that work and things that don't work. So head on over to the Facebook group. I'll actually put a link of the Facebook groups in the description of this video so that you can join. Right, so last week we chatted about functional foods, and we chatted about a few different foods that provide some minerals and vitamins that would assist with preventing injuries, and just for dogs that have general joint issues. We also did exercises, and we did serpentines. So we did them on the flats and we did up and down hills. So if you missed any of those, just scroll down and you can just do a recap of tutorial 9. So today I want to chat about injuries and trying to minimize injuries. So I mentioned in the tutorial last week that Sunshine, she's my little doggy who's 3 or 4 years old now. I'm not too sure because we rescued her. But she has hip dysplasia in both of her hips, and her left one is the worst one. And on Monday last week, just due to miscommunication, Sunshine ended up going for 2 walks and did like 9-10 Ks in a day, which is just way too much for her. And so I've been treating her now for the last week and a half or so, and she's only really now come right. So she's had acupuncture, laser, magnetic therapy, and she ended up getting a right shoulder injury. So I wanted to explain to you guys why this is happening, first of all, and then just to see the things that could be potentially putting your dog at risk for getting injuries, and really why we don't want them, because they have really negative effects long term when we start getting other injuries. So the first thing is that when a dog has hip dysplasia, they shift their weight. So what they do is, say for example, Sunshine, her left hip is the painful one. She shifts her weight onto the right floor. So whenever she's standing, whenever she's walking, she's putting more weight onto the other legs and mainly the right floor, and that's usually where they do it, on the diagonal, because she doesn't want to take weight on that left hand because that's painful for her. And in doing that, what she does is she overloads the support structures in that right front leg. So the ligaments and the joint capsule and the tendons and muscles, they're all able to cope with this specific load. So the body is made how it is to take 60% of the weight in the front and 40% in the back. So now when there's an imbalance there and you increase the amount of weight that the dog is taking on its front leg, now maybe they're taking 70% of their weight in their front legs and maybe only 30% in the back, specifically for dogs that have hip dysplasia. And those structures are able to withstand a certain load. And when that load increases, it puts them under stress. And small little fibers start to tear off. And those structures are predisposed now to becoming injured or stretched or damaged because of this increased load. So what happened with Sunshine is that she is able to cope with that extra load for a certain amount of time. But the longer that time that she's exercising, the more the load starts to starts to affect those structures. And so normally I would do that 4 to 5K walk, and that's enough for her. But doing that twice, those structures were just completely overloaded, and she ended up with a soft tissue injury on that right shoulder. And so something now that I've had to treat. She has not been able to go for any walks because she has been so lame. She hasn't done any of her therapeutic exercises for the last week and a half. And it's had a real negative effect on her quality of life. And so it's really, really important that we minimize this, because probably if I did a muscle mass measurement now, there might be a little bit of muscle wastage even. So from 7 to 10 days of not using specific muscles, we start to see muscle wastage. So, and this was a quick treatment. It took a week and a half. Sometimes we can get injuries that can take 3 to 6 weeks to see improvement. And then all the work that we've done, building all the muscle to help support the hips, is taken away, and we need to start again and start building them up. So minimizing injuries is so important. Now, our dogs can get injured in two main places. We get primary injuries, which would be in the hip itself, so the hips that are dysplastic. And the reason that this is an area to get injured is because generally the muscle around there is not well formed, and so the joint is usually more predisposed to getting injured. So if a dog that has a slip, if they've got a nice big muscle mass there, which we are obviously working on, that'll help to support the joint. If there's not a lot of muscle there, which is often the case in a lot of our hip dysplasia cases, then that joint is able to pop out or to stress the tissues that are supposed to be holding that joint together. So we would call that a primary injury. So a dog can sprain a joint that is either arthritic or a hip, for example, and they'll be sore on that hip. And then what's happened with Sunshine is she had a secondary injury. So not on the actual joint that's the problem, so not on the hips, but on the shoulder, which is because secondary to the hip. So it occurred because of the hip dysplasia, because she was shifting her weight to another area. So if we look at all the risk factors for dogs getting injured, it usually happens when they're not warm. Take them, for example, in the car, and you take them out straight off the lead, run around, do all the zoomies and run around, all excited about going for their walk. That's usually when they will either slip or fall. They can have an injury then. It's important to try and warm up slowly. So what you want to do is have them on the lead, and you'll take them for when you take them for a walk, get them out the car, put them on the lead, warm them up slowly. So you do a little bit of walking, let them trot a little bit until they're warm, and then take them off the lead so that they're not running around like crazy before they're warmed up. So when the tissues heat up a little bit and they warm up, what happens is the tissues become a lot more elastic. So if a dog slips or falls and that joint maybe pops out a little bit, those tissues that are around there, the joint capsule, maybe the ligaments, they'll have an ability to be able to stretch a little bit more and not tear so quickly if they're warmer. And also, if muscles are the warmer the body, the better the muscle contraction. So studies have actually done, if you can increase the body's temperature by 1 degree, the muscles will be able to contract. There'll be a 20% stronger contraction. And we know that it's so important that in order to be able to help support unstable joints, that we have a good muscle contraction. So warming up helps to cause the muscles that are already there to contract really, really well to help support the pet's joints. So I put in there cooling down because this is really important just for preventing stiffness after exercise. So if you take your dogs for a walk, you warm them up, and in the same like you cool them down. You don't let them sprint around and then put them straight in the car. Keep them on the lead for a little bit, let them cool down slowly, and then they can hop in the car and they're less likely to get stiff and sore afterwards. And then stretching. So there are different types of stretching. You get passive stretching and you get active stretching. So passive stretching would be when we are actually physically stretching them. So I don't really like passive stretching. because you never know how much you should be stretching, and there's no control as to what can happen. So, for example, if you're stretching them and the dog jumps, you could end up actually hurting your dog. So I prefer active type of stretching, and you can do this using a treat. So say, for example, the exercise where you do the side bends, you can take a little treat and get them to eat at their hips, so they bend and stretch all the muscles in their back. The back is a very common area that often gets injured. You can also get them to lie down, and that'll stretch all the muscles in the front legs. You can get them to stand up, so put their feet up onto something, also stretching the muscles in the hind legs as well as the back. So the different ways in which you can stretch actively. So that means that the dog does the movements, but they're in control of what is happening. And it's less likely for injuries to happen just in doing the stretcher. So if your dog has abnormalities or poor conformation, this can predispose them to getting injured, because because of this, they will alter the way that they walk, overloading other structures. The core is so important, and there are so many dogs that have weak cores. So I think it was last year or the year before, I did a national workshop where I taught therapeutic exercise for improved mobility, and I had a number of people that do agility. So performance dogs, they brought their dogs with, they came. There was one dog that was an agility champion, right? You watch this dog, you would think that it is so strong, but the dog is able to do things, but it's not using its body correctly. And this particular dog, I used to see all the time in my clinic for injuries. So soft tissue injuries, muscle tears. And the reason that I was seeing it so much is because it had a weak core and it wasn't strong. And so when a dog has a weak core, when they are doing things, there's no support for their joints, and there's no support for the body, and they're able to do things, but they don't necessarily do them correctly, and it ends up with injuries. So it's really, really, really important that we work on core strength and muscle strength. And when I'm talking about muscle strength, I'm talking about targeting the muscles that support your pet's joints. And this is important. So it's not just taking your dog for a walk. That's not going to strengthen the correct muscles. We need to target the muscles that are important for joint stability. So if our dogs also get injured, so say, for example, Sunshine now has had that right forelimb lameness, and she's had that shoulder injury. This is not the first time it's happened. So this has happened before. So as soon as we get an injury, that area then becomes a weakness, and it becomes an area that flares up continually. And that's why we don't want injuries to happen, especially secondary injuries, because they're just another thing for us to manage. So it's enough that we have to manage her hip dysplasia. Now we continue having to manage another area that is potentially coming up as a problem. Okay. Muscle imbalances. This happens when because of the compensation. So because of dogs walking incorrectly, Sunshine has poorly developed muscles in her hind legs, and she has well-developed muscles around her forearm. So in trying to compensate for that increased weight being distributed onto the front legs, she overuses her front legs no matter what she does. So when she gets up, you can see she hardly uses her back legs, and we're doing exercises. I'm doing exercises with her now to encourage her to use more of her hind legs. But even though she has that extra muscle development there is still a load on the tendons and the ligaments because of that weight distribution that is incorrect. And so we end up with muscles that end up becoming very tight in the front. They are being overworked continuously because they're trying to compensate for this increased weight. They're trying to help the tendons and ligaments out to help support. And when muscles are overused, they fatigue very quickly. And when they're fatigued, they're not able to do their job, and that's when we get the ligament tear or the tendon damage. So lack of flexibility. If a dog doesn't have good flexibility, then when they do movements, they're sort of like a plank. And in doing that, they end up slipping and not able to correct themselves correctly because they're not flexible. So one of the exercises we did, that side bends one, which I was telling you about, the stretching in an active way is a really great way to promote flexibility and make sure that if your dog does slip at a funny angle, that they're able to correct themselves, and not because they are so stiff and so tight that they're not able to put their legs where they need to put them. So hazards in the environment is something whenever you go for a walk, you need to be aware of. And this often happens. As soon as you get your dog out the car, they run off and then they injure themselves, usually because they're running around like crazy, they haven't warmed up, and they put their foot in a hole or whatever. So whenever you're taking them for a walk, you always assess your environment to make sure that there's nothing that can potentially hurt them. And if you are walking and you go through an area which is potentially dangerous, then you put them back on the lead for that time. So things to look out for are rocks, are holes. If they're swimming, getting in and out of the water, they potentially could hurt themselves. So just use your common sense. Have a look at the area. Say, is there anywhere that they can slip or fall? Wherever we're walking, and try and choose places that are safe and have even terrain where there are no holes and big rocks and things that they're going to be jumping over. Their weight is really important. We've spoken about weight in the early tutorials, but for the same reason that we are shifting weight onto the front, the heavier they are, the more weight for those front legs, even more weight. And that's why keeping them lean is really, really important. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is medications. So there are a few medications that can predispose our dogs to get injured. So one of them is an antibiotic called enrofloxacin or Baytril. And we often might not even think that our dogs, maybe we need to be careful if they go for a walk, if they're on an antibiotic, especially if it's for something that's not systemic. So let's say it's for an ear infection or for a skin infection. The dog is still fine in itself. It's not sick. So we're still obviously going to exercise them, and we take them for a walk and they overdo it and they end up getting a ligament or tendon injury. And so enrofloxacin, it has an effect on collagen production, and so it can cause weakness in ligaments and tendons. And we see it in people too. On this antibiotic, that you have to be very careful exercising when taking enrofloxacin. So the last thing is age. The older a dog, the more chance they have of being injured. And it's really just because they have usually a lot of compensation. Their joints and ligaments, they might have arthritis, and their joints and ligaments are just not able to withstand the tension that we potentially put them under. So this week's exercise is stairs. And I know previously I've told you to block off the stairs, but we're going to use stairs now to try and build muscle strength in our hind legs. And what we always want to do is to walk upstairs in a controlled fashion. So you can see that this dog is on a lead. We want them to go as slow as possible. We don't want any of that bunny hopping. If they are bunny hopping, we're not getting the results that we want. We want them to walk using individual legs up and down the stairs. So when we choose the type of stairs we're going to go first, we're going to look for stairs that are not too high and that are quite long. So we don't want very cute angles to go up, because this is harder for them to go up and down. So we start off with maybe 8 or so stairs that are not too high, and as they get better, we can increase the amount that we're doing, and we can also increase the how steep the stairs are. All right, so next week we're going to be talking about maintenance and how important it is to maintain the strength that we've built up. So it'll be 4th of April, exactly the same time. And just a reminder, please come and join us on the Facebook group. We have got loads of people on there sharing information and sharing their tips and their advice, as well as all the Q&As and Facebook Lives that I'm doing on the group. So after the Facebook tutorials on the Holistic Vet page are finished, I'm going to be moving all of my online training and tutorials onto the Facebook group. So if you don't want to miss out, please click on the link and join us. Thank you so much and have an awesome day. Take care. Bye.